Pranam and welcome to my journey from Islam to Hinduism.
You're supposed to be a natural seeker. A seeker means, what it means is, you're seeking truth, the ultimate truth of nature. Well, the Vedas have already said it, the Gita has said it, Bible has said it, any number of scriptures have said it, any number of sages and saints have said it. Messiahs and sons of gods have been born in this country in, many dozens of them. But though all of them have said it, the individual has the right to seek. He need not accept anything that anybody has said. We respect all of them. We revere all of them for who they were. But for me, I have to seek. I will not go by what Rama said or Krishna said or Buddha said. I have to seek and know for myself. So here the culture is that of seeking. So every human being has to seek and find. That means there is no imposition of somebody else's truth upon me. We have never been kind of psyched to believe something. Here always questioning, debate is… Indians can debate about everything, you know. So, just about everything, about the very existence of God, you can sit in a temple and debate about it. You can sit in a temple and debate about the existence of God. Nobody will persecute you. There is no such thing as a heretic in this country. You can ask most fundamental questions and you can seek truth.
When you put a message of exclusivity next to a message like that, there's no comparison. And at least that's what's going on in my mind and in my heart when I hear the message of Sanatana Dharma. And so let me go ahead and get into, first of all, the definition of Hinduism, and then second of all, kind of deal with this whole thing of conversion, because stemming off from the presentation that I made a couple of weeks ago on what it is that I believe, I clarified that universalism, the perennial philosophy, those types of things, subjective idealism, definitely play into my perception of reality.
Religion has fundamentally become just a certain set of beliefs. Believing… first of all, why believing has come? Why do you believe in something? Because you're not sincere enough to admit that you don't know so much of your life. False sense of knowing. So the moment you believe something, you're in a natural conflict with the rest of the existence. So, now if religion is spreading bad blood in the world, which it definitely is simply because people are just going by a simple set of beliefs and they believe this is it. My belief is everything. Anybody who's not in this belief must be saved or is not okay or whatever else. This is definitely conflict. People are talking about one religion in the world. I don't think so. I think we should have 7 billion religions in the world. Each individual, because it's something very intimate, something within yourself.
Only one thing that pluralism does not accept or will go against, strongly against, is the idea of converting people. Because the pluralism says that everybody is progressing spiritually in the path that suits his own background, his family background, his cultural background, his social background. So they come from a particular tradition. Suppose they are a devout Christian family for 1,000 years. So they've got a background already to themselves. They've got a starting point of their religious journey. So pluralism says carry on, continue to follow your Christian path or whichever path appeals to you from your background and progress to its destination. So asking people to change their paths is something that goes against the idea of pluralism. It's in fact offensive to ask people to convert. At the same time, suppose somebody insists they want to change religion. And suppose they say, no, we want to change. Does pluralism say, no, you can't. You have to be born as a Hindu, otherwise you are not Hindu. No, you must have that openness as well.
Okay, so there is no conversion, but if I want to be Hindu, I can simply just perceive the truths that are there and go about seeking the divine rather than converting. And so I was never asked to convert. I don't have to convert. There's no historical evidence that there's ever been conversion in Sanatana Dharma, and already that by itself is appealing. But nevertheless, this isn't a missionary group where people have to be saved or convert and stuff like that. And the more and more I studied the tradition, the more and more it resonated with how I understood reality and compassion and love and unity and the interconnectedness of all things and so on and so forth. But when it comes to the actual term Hinduism, this is a European term. This is not the name of the tradition. The name of the tradition is Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana has been defined in different ways. Sanatana means ancient or eternal or primordial, always with no beginning and no end. It's always been. And Dharma means the nature of what is. So, for example, the Dharma of a knife is to cut. The Dharma or the nature of the human is to be who he is, with the personality traits, with the trauma, with the intelligence and the talents and the gifts and so on and so forth. That everyone is exactly who they are supposed to be. Everyone has their unique dharma, and then there's generic levels of dharma, and then there's primordial, primordial essence, which is Brahman or the divine. And so there's no such thing as Hinduism. There is Sanatana Dharma, and the eternal path is truth expressed in a multiplicity of ways. And that obviously appealed to me because I believed in universalism. I didn't believe in exclusivity. And so universalism was definitely one of the first things that mattered to me the most, and Hinduism was completely compatible with that. And on top of that, the understanding of divinity was one of the other major reasons why Hinduism just fit perfectly in with what I was perceiving to be the truth. So I'll get into the understanding of divinity in a moment, but what I want to do is kind of explain how I got into Hinduism. What's the history behind it? How did I come across the religion, and so on and so forth. So about 6-7 years ago, there was a Muslim friend of mine who was from Oregon, and he introduced me to Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, or Osho. He asked me to check him out and wanted to know what I think. And I was like, back then I was completely oblivious when it comes to Hinduism. I mean, growing up, I think like in the early 80s, late 80s, early 90s, I remember some like Amitabh Bachchan films, right? Classical Amitabh Bachchan films, and there was like a little bit of exposure to like some Hindu statues and deities occasionally in like a Bollywood film. But honestly, I never listened to Indian music or watched Bollywood movies. I grew up in the United States of America, so my culture and mentality was either American or Islamic and Pakistani. And so I didn't really have a ton of exposure to Hinduism. And the first time I really came across it was when that friend had introduced me to Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, or Osho. And so I had come in contact for the first time with the rhetoric and the language of Dharma. And it was very unfamiliar to me at that time. And so I was very much intrigued by it. So another thing that happened was, because my background is in psychology, I had come across meditation and mindfulness, and also yoga, but especially meditation and mindfulness, in the alleviation of suffering and the facilitation of growth. And so I worked at a number of hospitals. I worked as a part of a number of behavioral health and mental health groups, and pretty much mindfulness and meditation have become mainstream. Okay, the third thing that happened was I was introduced to Deepak Chopra. And I know that as soon as you probably hear Deepak Chopra, there might be thoughts going on in your mind about New Age spirituality and the difference between New Age spirituality and Hinduism. And maybe I could do a video in the future about that. But right now, let me just say that I clearly understand the difference. I respect the sampradaya and the parampara, the tradition that comes with Sanatana Dharma and its history, the various teachers that have arose, and the various rishis and swamis and gurus. and the parampara that stems from that. There's a reverence on my end for that. Although at the same time, Deepak Chopra was instrumental. Deepak Chopra was instrumental in introducing even a vague form of Hinduism, or pseudo Hinduism, if you will. And from that, I literally started to gain more and more respect and reverence for the tradition of Hinduism, even though Deepak Chopra doesn't advocate any tradition or religion in that way. Understand that a lot of Americans are first introduced to something like meditation or Sanatana Dharma because of teachers like Deepak Chopra and Eckhart Tolle and Oprah Winfrey, before which there might not have been as much exposure to the narratives of the Upanishads and of the narratives of Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, because Buddhism is pretty big amongst Westerners as well. Speaking of Buddhism, because obviously in this path of seeking meditation and mindfulness and all of these types of things, obviously I came across Buddhism as well. And matter of fact, the Sangha that I attend to the most are, are Buddhists in terms of meditation and a satsang or a teaching that's given. A lot of my attendance has been with Buddhists. So why not Buddhism instead of Hinduism, right? The scenario is simple in terms of how I would answer that. The way I would answer it is that Buddhism, all of its focus is on suffering, dukkha, and the Four Noble Truths. And so if Buddha Dhamma is centered around suffering and the alleviation of suffering, then that is like one very, very, very small aspect of Sanatana Hindu Dharma. Sanatana Dharma is so vast, it covers so much that the topic of suffering or the alleviation of suffering is just one nuance of the massive tradition that is Sanatana Dharma. So the Dharma doesn't just focus on suffering, but there's a whole host of other things that we can explore and contemplate and meditate upon. So in a nutshell, I appreciated how comprehensive Sanatana Dharma was. And in addition to how comprehensive it is, I now want to kind of get back into the original topic of divinity. And, this is definitely where a major difference comes into play between Buddha Dhamma and Sanatana Dharma, in the sense that Hindus will acknowledge divinity and will have techniques and methodologies by which one can discover the divine within. And so this is one of the main reasons why I would say that I've chosen Sanatana Dharma over Buddhism, because of its acknowledgement and its pursuit of the divine. And so how do we introduce divinity in Hinduism? And here's the thing, given that my background happens to be in Islam, and this is supposed to be a video about my journey from Islam to Hinduism, one of the big concepts or issues that comes up is divinity. And so what I want to do is I want to play 3 brief clips of 3 Muslims explaining a particular concept, and then I'm going to use this explanation to help people who are out there to understand how Hindus perceive divinity.
Those who worship idols, who have philosophized their worship, will tell you, I am not worshipping this idol that you see, Ganesh, the elephant head god of the Hindus. I am not worshipping this object that you see, I am worshipping Brahman, the one God who is everywhere and who pervades everything. But those who are more educated, the yogis, their sheikhs, the sheikhs will give you this explanation of the essence of their worship. So when one says Allah is everywhere, one supports their idolatry. One supports and promotes the idea that Allah is mixed up inside of His creation. And that leads ultimately to the claim that Allah and His creation are one. what is known as Wahdatul Wujud, or monism. This is an idea which was propagated by Ibn Arabi al-Andalusi from the 13th century, who made this claim. Everything, why are you worshipping anyone outside of yourself? Allah is in me, Allah is in you.
Some Sufi went to the stage of saying that we are one with God, Wahdatul Wujud, but it is totally shirk, which is haram in Islam. So Sufis have gone to different stages. Some said that we become one with God. How can we become one with God?
The first group is best exemplified by people like Ayn al-Qudat al-Hamadani, Ibn Farid, Ibn al-Arabi, Ibn Sab'in, Jalaluddin al-Rumi, and others of their nature. Their writings do have elements that can be considered to be supportive of pluralistic doctrines. For these Sufis, anyone who had a genuine love of the divine was on the correct path regardless of a specific religion. The belief in the validity of other religions by these Sufis was not due to any inherent doctrine that truth itself was more than one, but rather was based on the doctrine that there was no existence of anything other than the truth. In other words, a belief in the validity of all religions was a natural result of the belief in monism, or wahdat al-wujud. For if there was no existence other than the existence of God, this implies that anything anyone worshipped would in fact be God. And there are a number of explicit quotes from Ibn Farid, Ibn Arabi, al-Rumi, and others that clearly link belief in wahdat al-wujud to a case of salvific pluralism.
So I presented these three videos for a reason. Number one, it clarifies in a very simple way how Hindus perceive divinity. And it does so by quoting three Muslim scholars who completely understand that through the tradition of Islam, this understanding of Tawheed, of the one true God, has existed within their tradition as well. So that there's no confusion about how Hindus understand divinity. I wanted to present these three quotes. And now for Muslims who are wondering, why do Hindus believe what they believe, or how can they possibly believe in one God and yet have this array of multiplicity of expression and deity and so on and so forth? Well, introduce to them the concept of wahdatul wujud, which is present in historically in Sufism. The Gnostics and the Gnostic Gospels teach exactly the same thing. Taoism, and the understanding of the yin and the yang and of nature teaches the exact same thing. Shamanism and animism teaches the exact same thing. Kabbalah within Judaism teaches the exact same thing. And when you look at all of the world's religions, they're all teaching this one thing, monism, that all is one. Every single religion, with the exception of two religions, namely Protestant Christianity, Catholicism as well. They separate God from you. So Christianity and then mainstream Islam, Sunni and Shi'i Islam, that will separate the divine from you, except again who? The Gnostics and the Sufis. So the perennial philosophy says that all of the world's traditions have been teaching this universal truth that all is one, and that all is one with God. The only religions that don't are again who? Christianity and Islam. So these are the exceptions to the mainstream perceptions of divinity historically and in contemporary times. And so for people who think that the idea of one God makes sense, please consider panentheism or monism, a way of understanding the immanence and the transcendence of the divine, and yet the interconnectedness of all things as well. And so Hinduism has this theology, and it's exactly not only what I understood, but what I've personally experienced, my personal mystical experiences, specifically the experience of Advaita, where one has an out-of-body experience where all that you know about the self and the ego dissolves, and you become one with everything that is, was, and ever will be. And in 2012, I pursued the mystical experience, and it confirmed the philosophy that all is one for me personally. And so that's kind of how I adopted the perspective of Advaita, because of those mystical experiences, but also because of the perennial philosophy that all of the world's religions understand and perceive and experience this reality. Whereas the two religions that are exclusivist, that separate God from you, They do not perceive this reality, and instead they are indoctrinated. Instead of seeking and finding God yourself and experiencing God yourself, it's about inheriting your beliefs and being told what to believe by an established theological framework. Two completely different ways of approaching reality. And when anyone, at least myself, when I think about the difference between those two perspectives, inheriting dogma versus discovering and knowing divinity, I have to pick discovering and knowing divinity over inheriting what you believe, because of the ijma and the scholars and the tradition and the sunnah, and the ulama have kind of forced their interpretation on the religion and have lost completely the original mystical experience that the Prophet of Islam had. And so that's, in a nutshell, why and how I came to Hinduism. Hinduism has blown my mind. It is so comprehensive. It tackles psychology. It tackles spirituality and mysticism. It tackles biology and nutrition. It tackles anatomy and physiology. It tackles physics, and in a way that is completely in line with what science is saying. When we look at quantum mechanics and we look at theoretical physics, how everything is interconnected and interdependent. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything exists in relation to everything else. This is basic chemistry, biology, and physics. And Hinduism, from my perspective, is completely in line with that, where you use the Abrahamic traditions. Unless you go to the perennial mystical traditions within those religions, you're going to get a very immature way of looking at God and having a relationship with God. Theologically immature. That does not take away the individual and their experience within their heart and within their life, erroneous of what dogma or doctrines they profess, that experientially and practically they are experiencing the divine, even though the theology is, one that is dry and forced upon the minds of people. And so what I want to touch on right now is sort of what path that I've been taking in the context of Hinduism. So obviously I believe in Advaita, the non-duality of all things. And to experience Advaita is the path of yoga, right? And so yoga is not just your mainstream hatha yoga, where you're doing all of these different asanas, these different postures, although that's excellent. I've taken many yoga classes, and the blood flow and the oxygen flow and the clarity of mind that comes with hatha yoga is phenomenal. But yoga is a methodology. It's a principle by which one experiences union with the divine, or oneness with the divine, or Advaita, non-duality with the divine. And so this is sort of my path. So bhakti, being in devotion, or jnana yoga, which means to study the scriptures and the philosophy and the sciences to understand reality better. And through pursuing philosophy and science, one can experience union with the divine. So jnana yoga, through studying the scriptures as well. And Raj Yoga, which is, meditation, and leads to that enlightened state of being able to let go, being detached, being content, experiencing oneness. All of that comes through contemplative, meditative practices, which are known as Raj Yoga. And then there's Karma Yoga, which is selfless service, doing things for other people without expecting anything in return. And so Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Raj Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga are all four paths are definitely a part of my life. In terms of devas and deities, one that speaks to me and one that I've personally experienced is, and evoke for that matter, is Shiva. And the reason why I've gone with Shiva over any other deva is because of the results that one gets with Shiva. Shiva is destruction, right? And destruction could mean destruction of a paradigm, or it could mean the destruction of one's own ego. But the idea is that we need to be humbled, and our complete paradigm needs to be utterly destroyed. Our complete contentment and satisfaction with day-to-day life needs to be destroyed. in order for to wake us up and to reform us and to refine us and to create something that is more profound, replacing that which was there previously. And so it's an evolution. It's an ongoing. Shiva is an ongoing evolution where death needs to take place in order for something more evolved and profound and transformed to replace it. And then that lasts for a while. This is the work of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And that is created and it's sustained for a while until it is destroyed again, and then something more profound replaces it. And so Shiva is something to be evoked. In order to grow spiritually yourself, and in order to wish the destruction of the paradigm that is causing suffering in the world. And so if there's certain politics, or there's certain governments, or there's certain themes in society that are detrimental to society, it is the work of Shiva that comes to destroy that in order to renew. And so that's kind of the context of where I am in terms of my practices with Hinduism. In terms of where I'm going to go with this, I want to go to India, obviously. My plan is definitely go to India. I want to go and study at an ashram. I don't know if that ashram is going to be completely unknown, and the teacher and the guru is going to be completely, my guru and somebody who's teaching me and tutoring me one-on-one. And if it'll happen that way, or if I'm going to go and look for a teacher that's more mainstream. So for example, one of the ashrams that is most appealing to me is the ashram of Anand Murti Guruma. And Anand Murti Guruma is a phenomenal teacher. She speaks my language. When she speaks Hindi, I understand her. When she speaks English, I understand her. She embraces Hinduism and elements of Sufism. And so I don't know. I would like to find either her or somebody like her, but we'll see where this leads to. And so within the history of India, you have Muslims who've been inspired by Sanatana Dharma. You have Sai Baba of Shirdi, who's been inspired by both Islam and Christianity, or Islam and Hinduism. And then you have Sri Ramakrishna, and you have Guru Nanak, who have appreciated the world religions, and have expressed these same universal truths that we're talking about today. And so the two statements in Hindi that I want to mention are one, log kehte hain ki khuda nazar nahi aata. People say that we cannot see God. Lekin deewane se pucho to khuda ke siwa kuch nazar nahi aata. But ask the devotee, and he will tell you that he sees nothing other than God. And then another one is, idhar hai masjid, udhar hai shivalay, jahan mutmain ho, wahan sar jhuka le. And what this means is, look, there's all these temples, there's mosques, there's temples. Wherever you go, just bow your head. And so this type of mentality, I didn't even know was possible. I didn't know that it was possible to see life this way and reality this way. I thought it was Christianity, Islam, and atheism. Those are the three perspectives that I were given as options growing up in the United States of America as a Pakistani Muslim. But to find out that there's a different way to look at reality, not just a different way to look at reality, a more profound way to look at reality that is much more in line with what's going on in terms of science, philosophy, and in our collective evolution towards understanding reality better and better, Sanatana Dharma is much more in line with that from my angle or from my perspective than mainstream Protestant Christianity or Sunni Islam. And so I'm very humbled to have found this path. I'll definitely keep you guys informed as my journey continues. And thank you for listening. Peace and love. Namaste, pranam, and see you soon.